being in Western Pennsylvania, I suspect we have a lot of Steelers fans in the audience. Steelers fans, throw up your hand. Who's Steelers fans? All right. It's a big win over Washington on Sunday. We got a big game against Baltimore coming up this week. People talk about the Steelers, the continuity as an organization that they have, having 3 coaches in 50 years, right? From Chuck Noll to Bill Cowher now to Coach Tomlin. What's also remarkable is the consistency they've had in other personnel. Specifically, for about 22 years, we only had one person who was the director of football operations / general manager. That person is standing beside me here. A lot of people aren't fully aware of the job responsibilities of a general manager. They probably have some idea. I'm sure our guest will probably elaborate a little bit on that. But in addition to overseeing the scouting process, the drafting process, free agency, working with ownership and the coaching staff, a lot of different things that go into a position like that. Some quick background. Our guest was born in the Pittsburgh area. He attended North Catholic High School, and he's a graduate of Robert Morris. He joined the Steelers organization in 2000 as the director of football operations. And as I understand, the position of general manager was created within the Steelers organization in 2010 when he assumed that title and was placed in charge of player transactions and acquisitions as the head executive in the Steelers organization. He and his team constructed 3 Super Bowl rosters, of course, winning it all in the 2005 and 2008 seasons. In 2022, after about 22 years as general manager, our guest took on a new advisory role with the Pittsburgh Steelers, working to help alumni, so former players, transition into life after football through the Steelers Lend a Hand program. He is also the head of a recently formed consulting firm. It is my pleasure and my privilege to introduce to everyone Mr. Kevin Colbert.
Thanks for that nice introduction, Dan, but honestly, he just stole half my talk because I was going to fill in a lot of blanks with some of that information. But again, thanks to all of you, the employees of Grossman, Yannick, and Ford, for allowing me to be part of your CPE day. I also understand there's different firms, and this is an annual kind of gathering that's been going on for 20 plus years. So again, I applaud you for wanting to try to, continue your professional education. I also would like to applaud all here for having the mindset of wanting to be better and acknowledging no matter where we are in our professional careers, there's always ways for us to continue to look to improve. The first question, though, is why would you have me speaking to a group of accounting professionals? Though I was able to graduate, as Dan mentioned, from Robert Morris College at that point with a degree in business administration, I did so by sweating myself through 2 mandatory accounting classes, Accounting 1 and Accounting 2. But thank goodness for folks like you who are able to master this profession to be able to help a lot of folks like myself. However, I do acknowledge that maybe I've been fortunate to have some professional success in the pro sports world, and some of that success may have been predicated on some experiences that I can share with you today. Before we get into that, though, I would like to share a little bit about myself. Dan touched on some of it, but so you can better understand where I'm coming from. I grew up on the north side of Pittsburgh. I graduated from North Catholic High School and started my college education at CCAC before moving on to Robert Morris College. Again, back then it was Robert Morris College and not Robert Morris University as it's known today. My experience in the sports world actually started there at Robert Morris. During my senior year, I worked as a sports information director. Believe we were playing Division I basketball, and the university didn't have an SID, the sports information director. They asked for somebody to apply. I applied, and fortunate that I was fortunate enough to get it. And part of my duties that year was to travel with the basketball team. Matt Furjanic was an assistant coach on that team, and the next year he was elevated to the head coach position when they made a staff change. Matt offered me a position as his graduate assistant basketball coach, which I accepted. I served in that position for 2 seasons and then actually became the head baseball coach for 1 season. While doing that, I also worked as an intern with the Blesto Scouting Service, which was headquartered here in Pittsburgh at that time. From there, I moved on to Ohio Wesleyan University, where I coached football and baseball, 1 year serving as the head baseball coach. After those 2 years at Ohio Wesleyan, I then moved into professional football, and again, going back to Blesto as a full-time scout working in the Northeast for 1.5 years. From Blesto, I joined the Miami Dolphins as a college scout for the next 5 years before joining the Detroit Lions as the pro scouting director for 10 years. I was then hired by the Steelers in the year 2000, first serving as the director of football operations. Later, that title changed to general manager and then VP and general manager. But in all honesty, the job never changed. It was the same job. We just changed the titles as I moved, through the organization. As Dan mentioned, I retired from that VP GM position a few years ago, or 3 years ago. I no longer do any football work with the team, although I should put my hand up like, hey, I'm still part of the team. They're 7-2. What am I doing here? But now as I head up a group called Lend a Hand, which works with our Steelers alumni as they try to transition into life after football. Within that group, we meet once a month. We do it virtually because the alums are all over the country. We just try to present on a different topic, not myself, but a professional will present. And again, we just try to help these young men transition because most of them are in their late 20s or early 30s as they try to move away from this world of professional football. I also started, the Colbert Sports Consulting Group, and most recently, we've been dealing with colleges. If you're a college football fan or a college sports fan, you understand that they're going to be under a salary cap in the year 2025. So they're tapping into folks like myself who may have some experience in doing that, and just trying to get some guidance on maybe the best ways to approach it. But really, how can I help you become better accounting professionals or administrators? A lot of times when having discussions about how to be better at what we do, we focus from the top down. Who's the CEO? What's the size of the organization? The flow charts, the net earnings, the growth potential. In sports, we may look at who's your Hall of Famers, who's your All-Pros, who's the president, the head coach, the GM. But I'd like to look from the bottom up. I go back to what the great Wayne Gretzky once said, don't go where the puck is, go where it's going to be. Focus on the future. Recognize growth potential. Encourage your employees or co-workers to recognize the importance of their role in your organization. Also, when we look from the bottom up, I believe we get a more realistic understanding of where we all came from, as well as what we had to do to be successful. None of us were born accountants, supervisors, directors, or general managers. Few businesses, teams, or organizations start off successful right out of the gate. I always love to read and learn about an individual or an organization's growth and look for lessons in what I may be able to utilize in whatever endeavor I was trying to be successful in. We obviously have to spend an enormous amount of time on the educational, technical, or work experience required for our own chosen field. This is obvious and required for success. But when we are all studying, working, and growing as professionals, I think it's pretty common to ignore our personal selves in the interim. Some of the factors we may want to refocus on: faith. I'm not here to judge anybody. on whether they practice a given faith or how important it is to them. But I am willing to share that I have the belief that along the way, a lot of real successful folks that I've met, they've had a strong background in their faith. Like faith, I believe family is very important. Family can be a different structure for all of us. We may or may not be in a relationship with another person. We may or may not have children. Maybe we come from a single-parent home or an adoptive home. Again, we can't be lumped together in a category other than that we all came from somewhere, and that somewhere will always be a part of us, which I believe will always be an important part of who we are. In recent years, mental health has become more challenging, especially since the pandemic. These challenges to our mental health and the subsequent challenges to our mental health professionals with treatment of those in need has grown tremendously. While overwhelming, I'm encouraged because I see more folks that are willing to acknowledge a potential problem so as to get help. This is very comparable to a spike in the concussions in our sports world. That gets a lot of attention, and rightly so. But there's really probably not that much of an increased number of concussive incidents. But because people are more willing to acknowledge the possibility of a concussion and to seek help for it, those numbers have spiked. And again, I think that's a real positive because it's being brought to the surface and dealt with. I also believe the more that we succeed, the more challenging it is for us to maintain our physical health. I say that having known you guys just finished a lunch and you're probably into that 7-minute mark where you're going to start fading on me, but that's all right. I've used every excuse in the book, be it age, time, good living, whatever. But hopefully we do find that time to take care of ourselves, because when we do, we'll feel better about ourselves and we will be better at what we do. In the world of professional football, only one accomplishment can define success, and that's winning the Super Bowl championship. You may have heard Coach Tomlin use the phrase, "The standard is the standard." As members of the Steeler organization, we understood and accepted the standard that this organization set in the 70s with their 4 Super Bowl championships in 6 seasons. This run has never been duplicated. We were fortunate to add 2 more championships to the Steelers total to take the Steelers total to 6 when I was associated with the team. This distinction of 6 championships is the most by an NFL organization, but it's also one that we unfortunately share with the New England Patriots. But once you win a Super Bowl, it's considered a failure if you don't do it again. In your accounting world, my guess is that you may define success as being part of a successful branch of an organization, or being a solid group leader, or maybe even ascending to being an accounting firm that's an industry leader. Whatever level or goal you reach, you set a standard for yourselves, and reaching that standard is a minimum as you move forward. Not only are we setting standards for ourselves, our branch, our industry, but we're also setting standards for our governing bodies. In pro football, that would be the NFL. In your world, it's Grossman, Yannick, and Ford. I'm not asking, but my guess is you probably don't always agree with some of the mandates those in charge hand down to you. I know I always didn't agree with the NFL, but I accepted my place within their jurisdiction and always tried to do what was good for our game, as I'm sure you always try to do what's right for your industry. In chasing success, I suspect we all might have had to work our way through many, many failures. I'm reluctant to compare failure in our worlds. In pro football, we may lose a game, But next week, we get a chance to make up for that loss with another win. My guess in your world, there's very little margin for error because significant amounts of dollars may be at stake, and an error may not be fixable or losses recoverable. So as to avoid losing a game or committing an error, we have to fully trust the teams that we have put together. Hard times and challenging situations will hit all of us. But we have to be prepared to weather those storms that may derail some others. Again, we all have standards that we're responsible for. Like as I mentioned, in Pittsburgh Steelers football, making the playoffs is a minimum, because if you don't make the playoffs, you can't qualify for the championship. Recognizing the standards that you set for yourself and your team, you have to trust that you'll be strong enough to weather those tough times. I will always be of the belief that our past failures are a huge part of why we have succeeded and will continue to succeed going forward. Going back in my home life a little bit, I lost both my parents at a very young age. My mother passed away when I was 5 years old, and my father passed when I was 15. From these unfortunate losses, I learned a lot about myself, about my faith, about my family, my friends, and life in general. I came from a very modest athletic background in high school and was a very average high school athlete playing football, baseball, and hockey. I always like to tell folks I still got what I never had. But I was able to play baseball at the collegiate level at Robert Morris. But despite my athletic limitations, I somehow found my way to working 38 years in pro football. When I was with the Miami Dolphins, we lost in the AFC Championship in my first year. With the Detroit Lions, we lost in the NFC Championship in year 2. And at the Pittsburgh Steelers, we twice lost the AFC Championship game again to the New England Patriots. In 2001, despite being 13-3, and in 2004, we were 15-1. Both of those losses were at home, and we were denied the opportunity to go to the Super Bowl. But that loss in 2004 was a catalyst for us in 2005. After starting out 7-2 in the 2005 season, we lost 3 in a row, and we put ourselves on the brink of elimination. That last loss that put us at 7-5 was against the Cincinnati Bengals. I will never, ever forget T.J. Hushmanzada, a wide receiver for the Bengals, shining his shoes in our runway leading out of the stadium with a terrible towel. After that game, Coach Colbert challenged the team. He told them he wasn't going to grade the film. He told them to grade yourselves. Look at what you did and didn't get done, and tell me how you're going to be better moving forward. That team remembered how hard it was to get to that AFC Championship game that previous year, and the sick feeling we all experienced after that loss. It must have struck a nerve, because they accepted Coach Colbert's challenge and they never lost again, thus becoming the first number 6 seed to win a Super Bowl championship. Though these failures do strongly influence future successes, please also be aware that continued success can be dangerous just as well. Coach Tomlin had a great saying where he would always remind the team that that red carpet can be very slippery. Though talent and technique are very important in building a championship team, I acknowledge and accept that. But I also ask you to prioritize the intangibles, because I truly believe they are the ultimate deciding factor in a win-lose situations. We live and work in a very objective, analytic world. There is an unlimited amount of tangible information to study in our professional game, just as I'm sure it does in a given audit or business plan. Not only for the accountant, but for any support person in that room with you. I ask you, who can make a critical decision at a crunch time when you have no time to research any more data? The mistakes I've made in building a team is when I misplaced or misjudged a player's heart and his smarts. Again, when we misjudge the hearts and smarts, that's usually the picks that we failed on. We all have a different level of intelligence and a desire to be great in what we do. But that true love of what we're doing and that true understanding of how to be great and to continue to be great will really make the difference. When we were evaluating players, we would ask ourselves, if we took football away from them, would they be devastated? Would they be satisfied? Or would they be relieved? Again, devastated, satisfied, or relieved. I'm here to say we had players in every group in those three categories. Hopefully we had more in that devastated group. But if you took the game away from them, if anybody took away your accounting profession away from you, would you be devastated? If you would, it means that that profession means a lot to you. Outside of your personal well-being, it's what you work for, it's what you strive for. The satisfied group, that can go one or two ways. The satisfied group in the NFL world might be a guy that plays 10 years, maybe wins a championship, makes significant dollars, and he wants to walk away with his health. And that's okay. But there's some other folks that get to a certain level, they check a box and say, hey, I made it. It's time for me to step away. Those types of folks probably aren't going to help you make critical winning decisions. It's the relieved people that I think we all have to be aware of and be a little cautious of. Again, in the NFL world, we probably had players that were so big, so fast, so athletic, just naturally gifted that they could play at that level, but they really didn't love the game. They were relieved when it was time to leave. And again, I think that can go into any aspect of any organization. There may be folks within your own organizations that if you took it away, they'd probably be thankful that you did that. And again, everybody has all these folks on different groups of these folks in each of their organizations. But the more you have, it'll be devastated, the more likely you're going to have a winning organization and a championship caliber group. There's also some non-negotiables. There can only be one goal, understood and shared by everybody in the organization. Again, not from the top down, but more importantly, from the bottom up. No hidden agendas, selfish ambitions, or shameless self-promotions. Recognize that working toward this goal, you have to be demanding, but not demeaning. Again, remember that if you're in an authoritative type of position, we all have to be demanding, but please don't be demeaning because it'll only take away from the job you're trying to do. Understand the personnel that you may be responsible for directing. Again, I work for the Miami Dolphins and the great Hall of Fame coach, Don Shula. And once we were in a scouting meeting talking about a given player or players on a team, and he said, when you got red paint, paint your barn red. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, back that up. Let me write that one down. It made all the sense in the world. When you got red paint, paint your barn red. Think about that. Know your people. Know what they're capable of and try to play to their strengths. I was very fortunate to have had the great Joe Green on my scouting staff with the Steelers for 9 years. Joe was awesome. We might win a game and Joe would say, that's good. He'd say, if you want to be great, do it again. Then I also had the blessed opportunity to work for the great Mr. Dan Rooney, another Hall of Famer. And he kept things very simple by reminding us when we had to make a critical decision, he'd simply say, do what's right. And then I would say, Mr. Rooney, how do I know what's right? And he would remind me that if I have to tell you what's right, you probably shouldn't be in the position you're in. As I stated earlier, look, I'm not qualified to make you any better at your given craft, but I do challenge each and every one of you to challenge yourselves and be open and honest about who you are, who you want to be, and in doing so, showing everybody on your own team how to be successful in chasing that one common goal from the bottom up. Thank you again for your time and attention. And I know, Dan, we said that we would be more than happy to answer any questions, because a lot of times the Q&As are more interesting than someone telling you a bunch of stories. So again, thank you, and I welcome any questions. And thank you for staying awake.
Who was the most surprising player that you underestimated, that maybe was in that satisfied category that ended up really excelling? Maybe was not in the devastated group that you mentioned.
Well, sometimes you look back on the free agents. We didn't draft them. They make your team, and all of a sudden they turn into Willie Parker or James Harrison. So they weren't satisfied, and it was a huge accomplishment for both of those guys to make our team, even though we cut James 4 different times. But they weren't just satisfied for being on those teams. James Harrison is Hall of Fame caliber. He should get into the Hall of Fame. He has the biggest defensive play in Super Bowl history, if not the biggest play in Super Bowl history, where he flipped that game against the Arizona Cardinals. Willie Parker has the longest run in Super Bowl history. In a few weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I think he'll go into our Hall of Honor, and rightly so. So I think about those folks that were, when you make a team, when you don't get drafted, you make a team, you could sit back and say, whoa, this is really cool. I shouldn't be here. But those two continue to work and make themselves into Pro Bowl, Super Bowl champions.
Hi.
How we doing?
You mentioned you don't have any accounting experience, but you had to deal with the cap all the time. So we don't agree with you.
That's why Omar's the GM now, because he dealt with it. No, and the salary cap, it's a very complicated mechanism that a lot of smart people at the NFL offices, the management council, which it's comprised of a bunch of lawyers that are very smart and understand that. And from a football standpoint, what we would say is, okay, we were given a given cap number. Now, I understood contracts and I understood the valuation of a player, and we would get into a negotiation. When we would get into a negotiation, I would, coach and I would talk about, okay, we're going to look at this position in free agency. And I would tell them, these are the players that are available. The one that we might be able to get is right in here. He's between players 7 and 8. He's probably going to get $5 million a year, something like that. And then we would give that job to the salary cap negotiator. At that time, it was Omar Khan. Now it's a gentleman named Cole Marcoux. And they would do the nuts and bolts. And we would sit back, when I say we, myself, the coach, and the owner, would give them the jurisdiction, the back and forth with the agents. Usually in a negotiation, if they weren't yelling at each other, they weren't close. And when they would get to be yelling at each other and frustrated, and you reached a stalemate, then I would interject and try to be a little bit of a mediator to try to finish it off. But that cap was put together by, like I said, the management council at the league. It's very, very complicated. All I was interested in is what's the number. And again, I understand the inner workings of signing bonus paragraph 5 incentives likely to be earned, not likely to be earned. If you cut a player, how much dead money accelerates in, so on and so forth. But I couldn't have been those people at the management council putting it together.
Can I follow that up?
Oh,
Same
yeah.
guy. What is your, I'm back here again.
I'm sorry?
I wanted to ask about the college cap. What are we in store for?
Wow. Okay, so Judge, I forget her name. There's a ruling coming down. It's already been tentatively agreed upon. It'll be ruled on the first week of April. And the colleges have to, the NIL, everybody know what NIL means? Name, image, and likeness. In 2016, the courts ruled that you could pay a player for his name, image, and likeness. Okay, he can do a commercial, he can do this, you can give him a car, that's all legal. But from 2016 to 2021, a lot of that wasn't going on. So the judge awarded a settlement, and the colleges had to pay millions of dollars to athletes from 2016 to 2021. The majority of that money will go to football players and basketball players, and I believe women's basketball is the third because they were the ones that missed out on the most revenue. Fast forward to now, in addition to NIL, which is still legal, colleges will be under a revenue sharing program where they can share the revenues with the players. So not only will the players be able to make that name, image, and likeness, but you're going to be actually able just to pay that player based on your revenues. The first one we think will be about $20.5 million for the whole university, all their athletes, and how they divvy that up, it'll be up to them. But most likely the majority of that money will go into football and basketball because they're the revenue producers. But that'll start in the 2025 season if this is approved, which we're anticipating it will, the first week of April. Yes?
Yeah, what's the most inspiring thing for you being involved in the position that you're in now after players' careers, and what's the most rewarding aspect of that?
You know, I hate when people reference our sport as a business. I hate that. And it is a business. It's a very lucrative business. And, you know, the TV and the monies, it's a little bit, I don't want to say embarrassing, but it's a very lucrative business. But I always tell folks, look, if you want to get caught up in that, that's fine. But go into a locker room after a big win, or go into a locker room after a big loss, and look at the human emotion involved. You see it, you know, we just watched the World Series, and those baseball players are very well compensated, and baseball is a very lucrative business. They hit a home run, and they wait for the guy at home plate, and they're all jumping around like kids on a playground because the game means something to them. As highly compensated as these folks are, it's still a game. It's still fun, and it still means a lot to them when they win a game or when they lose a game. That part, I don't think, that's a part that really always drove me. And it's like that, it's no different than a high school game on a Friday night when kids are jumping up and down and having a blast because they put together an effort to get to that common goal of winning that game. And I never wanted to lose that aspect of it because I do think it's a very, very real part of it. And again, I hate when it's referenced to as a business. Sure. I'm sorry if you couldn't hear. She asked about the programs that we do with Lend a Hand. Again, Lend a Hand is a program we started with the Steelers when I stepped away from the GM spot. And we just try to help our alumni transition into life after football. A lot of times, they probably started off at a young age. And, you know, when you're in a structured sports setting, as most of them that get to that level started off, you're taken care of from a young age. You're told how to eat, how to run, how to work out, how to train. You get to the collegiate level, how to go to class, what you got to do to be eligible. Professional level, you got to do this, this, and this, and all of a sudden it's gone. And they're 28, 30, sometimes it ends real quick, maybe a year or two. And, a majority of the players, believe it or, I don't think people understand or believe it, but the majority of the players walk away with a degree. I'd say it's probably about 70% of guys coming out of college now walk away with a degree, and it's actually higher than the, quote, non-athlete that goes to a college, the success rate. But when it's over, it's hard because they've been this person their whole lives. And they've performed in stadiums with maybe 100,000 people, and they've been on TV, and they go. They're recognized wherever they go. And then all of a sudden, when the lights go out, it's like, hey, I need to see the doctor. It used to be in the old days, you'd tell the trainer, okay, good, go down there this afternoon. They're waiting for you. Hey, I need to see a doctor. Well, okay, call them up, and you'll probably get in 2 months. Different things like that. Again, that's life. That's normal. And we just try to help them transition. So we'll get a different professional to talk to them. It might be about continuing education if they haven't finished. It might be a clinic on sleep, mental health. Our presentation this month will be by a player named Eric Kramer, who was a quarterback for us when I worked for the Detroit Lions. Eric tried to take his own life, and he survived. If you ever get to see his book and read it, it's unique. And Eric unfortunately lost a son to a drug overdose, and he's doing great now. But different things like that. We've done will estate planning and wills and living trust, and boy, I go back through, but those are the types of things we do each and every month, just to, again, give them an understanding that, hey, look, we're going to try to help you through this. And then we try to get off the call. When I say we, the administrative types get off and give them the locker room back, because that's what they miss. They miss that camaraderie. And it's been a nice little program, and I think it's been beneficial. You know what? Coach Cowher and Coach Tomlin are very much alike. And, people are like, wait a minute, I see this and I see that. No, they're very much alike. They both come from a traditional, old school mentality. When I came in from Coach Cowher and I are the same age. He grew up right over in Crafton. I grew up on the north side, same age, but we didn't know each other. Just, you didn't hang out with people from Crafton or north side. He was a better player than me anyway. And then I came in from the outside, and I had to learn Coach Cowher. But Coach Cowher was raised under Coach Marty Schottenheimer, who should be in the Hall of Fame as well, as great a coach as he was. But he was raised in an old school mentality. Coach Tomlin started off with a gentleman who used to be the head coach at West Virginia, who has since passed away, Coach Bill Stewart. Coach Stu gave Mike his first job, and as young as Coach was, they were both hired in their young 30s, in their early 30s, but they both had old school mentalities, and they still do to this day. Of course, Coach Cowher is now in the media, but Mike is very grounded in everything that he does. Both had great relationships with players. Bill had that persona, the tough disciplinary guy, and he was, but he also had a big heart for those players. Coach Tomlin is the same way. He might get more involved personally with the players. He's not afraid to tell the player, look, I'm going to be in your business because I know that I can help you. I'm not going to be interfering, but I know you're going to need help, and I want to be there for you. So I think they're very similar. But the one commonality is they're in the Steeler organization, and they both accepted what the Rooneys have been doing for decades. And that started with, the chief to Mr. Dan Rooney to Mr. Art Rooney now. I mean, there's only one standard, and that's winning a Super Bowl. And they both understood and accepted that standard that really Coach Knowles set for them in the 70s.
So my question is, on draft night, if, let's say, the player you guys really wanted was gone, and was there ever a disagreement You mentioned early on in your speech about, when it's crunch time, you've analyzed all the numbers, you need to make a decision. Did you ever run into that situation where maybe there was a disagreement amongst you? How did that situation get resolved and work out?
Sure. I mean, when you put together a draft, I mean, it's probably a year or sometimes 2-year-long process where we've been scouting players for that time period. The scouts, including myself, would have been out on the road and putting together reports and evaluations. Once the season's over for the coaches, we would give them a list of players that we liked and had ranked in a certain order, and they would have to evaluate them. We would then lead into, and again, that's a shortened version of everything that went on from August through April. But once we got into April, we had about 3.5 weeks of detailed meetings where when we did have differences, we got it hashed out. And again, we came up with every player had one report. It might have been 6 opinions, but I would take those 6 opinions and make it into one opinion, the opinion of what was best for the Steelers. So you go into a draft, we used to do the mock drafts, and everybody kind of probably understands that's just teams. We're just thinking about, okay, what are they going to do? What are we going to do? What if they do this? What are we going to do? And it was a waste of time. And finally we said, look, this is our draft board. And we might have been picking 20th that year. I said, we're picking first. Who we taking? Okay, that player's gone. Now we're picking second. Who we taking? So it didn't matter what anyone around us did because they were in an order that we would take them. So we knew there's 20 guys. We're going to get one of these 20 and we'll be happy. And you mentioned you get into that later rounds. Well, we would do that same exercise after the first night of the draft, the second night, and then going into the third day. And if you get into the 6th, 7th round and you're looking at different possibilities, you usually would have 3 or 4 at any position that you could take and be happy with. So it was never like there wasn't anybody to pick from. We would usually get 7 picks from about 125, and you may have started off with really 500 people, but you knew you were going to get them from that group. But those decisions and those, I don't want to say arguments, just discussions, I mean, they took place for really a month before the draft. Guys are anxious to get back to your meetings. I like it. Anybody else before I see a point somewhere. There we go.
When you say the standard is the standard, it always reminds me of like European soccer, kind of like a team like Barcelona will have an academy where they kind of raise up from the bottom to have that goal at the bottom. Do you ever see, like, with scouting getting younger and younger and younger, like, will NFL teams ever start at that bottom level, or do you think like that's what makes it unique and they'll keep the individuality of the players?
When you say start at the bottom level, you're talking about with their team?
With their training, they'll start when the kids are 7 or 8 years old. And in terms of like scouting, like now we've moved back from like NFL scouting starts now in high school really, because at the time they start college, they've already been known about for how many years. And like, at what point do you think that like you should start instilling that like art and like that standard into the children? Like how far back do you think we go?
Well, I think the NFL does try to do that in an indirect way, just by trying to promote the game. You know, they're selling it overseas now, but they do a lot of work with youth football. They can't be directly, it can't be their direct programs, but each team has an involvement. Mike Marchinski, who still works with the Steelers and works with the alumni as well, but Mike just put in it became a PIAA sanction, a girls flag football, which is great, you know, but it's a program to try to encourage young folks to play. So I think we have that at that lower level through the flag football if they don't want to play tackle football, which is okay. A lot of great players don't play tackle football until maybe high school, and that's okay. Some of them just, they don't want to play as youth. If they're interested in the game, that's what you want. And then if they develop and want to be, not professional, but if they want to be involved in the tackle football, I think the league does try to encourage that as much as possible. I don't think we do enough, quite honestly. You have to reinvest in your product. If you don't, it'll go away. And I believe we could do more along those lines, but I think they try to with the youth and the flag initiative for sure, especially with the flag getting to the young ladies now. I think that's really grown, and I congratulate Mike for getting it sanctioned as a PIAA sport. Yes, sir.
What went wrong with the Kenny Pickett decision?
Ooh. Well, Dan, I'm sorry, I gotta go now. Honestly, and I've said this on record, Kenny Pickett, I believe, will be an NFL start and win quarterback. I believe Kenny's record as a starter with us was, off the top of my head, all three quarterbacks that we had last year, Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, and Kenny, all had winning records as starters in the league. I don't know, because like I said, I'm not involved in any of the football. I don't know what their decision was. But when they, Russell Wilson, and you can see what Russell's doing right now. I mean, Russell Wilson he's most likely a Hall of Fame quarterback. And his whole situation, you talk about the salary cap, and, Denver's paying him $38 million not to be there. And all the Steelers are paying him is $1 million. So you get a Hall of Fame potential quarterback for $1 million. Why not? And I think that in that situation, Kenny wanted to compete. And, he said, look, Russell's your guy, but I want to be able to compete. And that's when they traded him.
Yeah, but how is he competing in Philadelphia?
Well, I mean, when you get traded, you don't have a choice as to where you go. But I will say this. I do believe that Kenny is and will be a start and win quarterback in the league. That's why we took him with the 20th pick. I have absolutely no regrets about taking him where we took him. Who's to say how he'd be doing if he was here? Nobody knows. But I do know that Kenny is a great young man. He's a team guy. He's a talented guy, and he was winning for us. But again, you can't argue with where they are right now. They're 7-2. They're in a great spot, and Russell Wilson's making big plays at the critical times. The other day he threw for 50%, which isn't great, but he made those big plays at the end of the game, and that was why they won. So I can understand it, but I will always say that I believe that Kenny is and will be a start and win quarterback in the league. Who else? Oh, over here in the corner.
Can you talk about the importance of culture, like when you were evaluating players in the draft and stuff? How did you weigh sort of the physical talents versus like what they might bring to the locker room, like areas where maybe you make an exception for a particular guy, other guys wouldn't?
Huge. It gets back to the intangible part that I talked about. I would often tell a player, or tell players. Sometimes in part of this little consulting thing I do, we go and talk to college kids during a bye week and, hey, this is what the scouts are looking for. And I would always tell them, I might be at a game and I'm going to see that game film 1 million times, right? But when you come off the field, I want to see what you're doing on the sideline. If you make a big play, are you one of these guys, it's all about me, or when the coach is yelling at you or coach is correcting you, how are you accepting it? I want to see how you're talking to your teammates. Are you encouraging a guy who dropped the ball or, gave up a sack? All that is very, very important. And again, talent is obviously, you got to have a certain level of talent to be able to play at that level. But that hearts and smarts, where I've made mistakes and where we've made mistakes is when we misjudge that. Because you can't measure it. You just have to trust it. But a big part of that is trying to talk to as many people as you can. people will tell you without telling you, if that makes any sense. When you talk, hey, what kind of kid is he? Wow, he's a great kid. Hey, what kind of kid? Oh, he's a good kid. You know, you read into that, and you just got to keep looking and trying to find that truth. But it's very, very important in that player's total makeup. And then you factor in also, will that player fit into our locker room? Sometimes we didn't draft a player because we knew or we felt he might not fit in our current situation. And we passed. And he may have gone on to be a great player with another team, but that's okay. We thought what we did was right for us. Just like I encourage you guys to do what's right for your organization. Don't worry about someone else. If it's right for you, then it's right. Yes, sir.
When TJ Watt was, you drafted him, I got to ask him the first question at his press conference.
Nice.
And I asked him about, how the Steelers talked to him. He said that the Steelers told him he was available. He was going to be their first selection. And I wanted to get from your perspective. Did you actually tell him that?
I didn't tell him that, no. No, and if someone told him that, it might have been a position coach or one of the scouts, but we would never tell a young man that. Only because you may have that intention, and all of a sudden, if TJ was here and we had a player up here, now it's hard to imagine there was many above TJ because we got him at 30, I think, which was very fortunate. But you never tell a player that because you have every intent of doing it, and all of a sudden this guy is available that you didn't think was going to be available, you have to take him. So I know I never told him that. Did we like TJ? Were we hoping he would be there? Absolutely. And we were very fortunate that he was because he's special. The clock on the screen just ticked down to 0. Dan, you guys got to go back to work. Anybody else before we shut it down? Going once, twice. Well, hey, thank you so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of your day and week.